Okay, welcome to Learning Stories with Abhishek Shetty. This is a show where we interview learners in the 21st century. Each individual profiled in this show has a unique story to share about how they acquired a set of unique skills in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, narrated, and imagined in these learning stories. Today's guest is Jatan Mehta. Jatan's a dear friend, but he writes about space communication and the moon, space exploration and the moon on his blog, which is blog.jatan.space. I'm going to put that in the link below so you can obviously read about it or read about his work after this interview. He's written so prolifically about space exploration and the moon that and he's a reason I got interested in science again. So I highly recommend his work. He's a contributing editor to Planetary Society, and there are a long list of achievements. He's also published in a lot of global news outlets. So as if you go through his blog, you will find out more about him. I don't want to spend too much time on the introduction. Jatan, thank you for giving us your time today. Um, I mean, I've known you, Jatan, as a friend for such a long time. So this is really exciting to start off this show with you. And I mean, I thought I'd start off with a story, Jatan. You know, when I was younger, I remember somebody asking me, Abhishek, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I think it was a family friend or an uncle. And I remember just telling that uncle that I want to be an aeronautical engineer or a space scientist. And I had no
That'd be
clue what,
nice.
yeah, I had no clue what these things meant. And then uh, I remember going into school and thinking, I'd take up science as I went into high school. But for some reason, I realized that I wanted to study science not because I was intrigued by the field. I studied science because um, I wanted to get into a good engineering school, so
Right.
or get a good job. And I feel like this was not the right objective. But I remember
Mm.
speaking to you the first time I remember speaking to you um, about science in general. I think we spoke about a lot of things. You must have given me a book by Richard Feynman, and it was just so different the way you spoke about science. And just to start off, Jatan, and this was just a little background story, but can you tell us how you first developed your interest in science, or where did you grow up? Just help our viewers understand that. Where did you grow up,
Mm.
and what was your childhood uh, like?
Sure. So yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor, and I'm very happy to be here. So to answer your question, how I got interested in science, it's basically a combination of things. First, I always liked science. I mean, just like any other subject, more or less, with few exceptions. So it was mostly from my elementary school when we got first introduced to the subject of science. So there were some interesting facts in there, and even as a child, uh, it was easy to get drawn to. So there was nothing particularly remarkable about that. However, the fact that I got interested in it in the first place was interesting because not everybody liked those facts. So that was the first thing. And later on, during my middle school, uh, the interest got shaped a bit more, and it was starting to take shape in specific ways. So, for example, I got introduced to astronomy, and that's when I was completely blown away by planets in the solar system and the stars beyond and so on. And as a child, that was just crossing the limits of imagination that I thought I had, and that was just and I could never recover from that to this day. This so I mean, lots of things are interesting in the world, and but to my mind in particular, to my mind personally, there was nothing that crossed the limits of imagination, just like anything as no anything even remotely as strongly as space exploration did.
Right.
So that was my introduction to space exploration. And but to be specific, the story that caught on, uh, you know the, so to be specific, the most important aspect in the development of space exploration in my life early on came with my school. omitting certain chapters of space exploration from the science syllabus. So they omitted chapters related to the solar system typically. Uh, they did it for 3 years in a row straight, and I was surprised by it, but somewhat also not caring for a while. I was like, okay, let's. It's just less work to do, less stuff to study. So I was more or less happy, just like any other child. However, once they did it for the third time, the curiosity got the better out of me, and I was like, okay, let's check what they have omitted. So the next year, I took to myself to just read the chapter anyway, and even before school started, and just like right in the vacation period. And so I just read about the chapter. The chapter was called "The Universe," and I was blown away. And that was the hook. And so I was like, why did they omit this all the time? But then in
Right.
retrospect, it's because they omitted it. Probably it gave me more of an incentive to check it out. Uh,
That's
so yeah, so that was basically what my uh, introduction to science was like. Apart from that, in terms of experimental science introduction, I had none.
mhm,
My school was just like any other school. We did not have any special emphasis on, learning by experimentation. We did not have fancy labs beyond the basic ones, or special time allocated for students to do whatever they want in those labs, or anything like that, the sort that you have now for
mhm.
many schools. So in that sense, a lot of my introduction to science was via textbooks and books that I could find in the library that is there for kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
yeah, so that
actually,
was
I mean, Jonathan, I remember you telling me about the library, and that's such an interesting space because a lot of times, young children are exposed to books in their local libraries. I know growing up in
yeah.
India, we don't have a very good public library system, but that's something
Hmm.
that would be really nice. But there was a story I remember you telling me about, about your dad taking you to this particular library, and this was the first time you were exposed to sort of books that were so
Yeah.
diverse, and there was a reasonable collection. But can you tell us uh, about this particular library, and maybe a book or two that really got you hooked to reading about science in general, and maybe space in particular?
Right. So, okay. So the library story goes something like this. After I got intrigued about the universe from reading the textbook, I was not sure where to find more information,
Mhm.
and the thought that my school has a library did not occur to me, to be very honest. Uh, and so I was just trying to tell dad, I just like this very much, and what should I do? Like, I want to learn more about this. And he told me to just take a bicycle ride around my neighborhood, just go a kilometer or two and just look for libraries that are there in the neighborhood. And so I looked for them and I got a couple of them, but only one of them was fancy and had a good collection of books. And to top it off, to put cherry on the top, it was called Planet Kids. And so it was a library for kids, and of of school, yeah, for schools, mostly high schools and middle school, and the just and for kids who are just starting school. So it was a library for kids, and I found a lot of space books there,
Mhm.
especially on topics which were just starting to introduce me to further things in space exploration beyond what I had already read in the textbook. And so there were top things like, I don't remember specific books, but I do remember that there were books on planets,
Mm.
and that was about the same time where when Pluto had been demoted by the astronomy community from a planetary status to a dwarf planet.
Oh.
So as a kid, that was interesting. Like, how can something just not be a planet anymore? I mean, so there was that. So there were books on planets. There were books on life in the life in space for astronauts, for instance. So that was also pretty intriguing. And then there were books. There was one book on the Hubble Space Telescope and what it had found in the universe thus far. So
Mhm.
there were some really pretty pictures in there, and information to go along with what those pictures really meant anyway, and things like that. And as I grew a little older, 2 or 3 years into that, so I had by that time I had consumed all of the books in that library. and I was looking for something more, and at that time I realized that uh, the the people in the neighborhood who get all these what do you call it these used books, right? So used bookstores and used magazines and stuff. So I started going there because just looking for something related to space that I could find, and then I stumbled upon a Scientific American issue, and that was my introduction to Scientific American. I did not know it existed before. I just saw a picture of something related to space on the cover of the magazine, and it looked intriguing, so I picked it up. And the level of detail in which Scientific American goes into obviously is incredible. And so this was the time when I had just entered high school, or junior college as people in India refer to it. So I just read some of those stories and it blew my mind. So the next thing I started to do was look up more magazines of Scientific American in these used stores, because they were cheaper than the actual copy.
Mhm.
And so I just started reading more of them, and then that cycle began basically.
It's so interesting because you're sort of hustling to get access to knowledge, and you were
Yeah,
so
yeah.
intrigued by the field that whatever information came, you were sort of trying to consume it and take it in. But it's so interesting that your dad was so supportive, and I'm just curious about the role of your mom and dad in supporting your curiosity. So, for instance, this was one story where you told your dad you were interested in this, and he recommended that idea. But do you remember other instances where both your parents were supportive? And can you help us understand a little bit about their influence on your eventual path?
Yeah, so basically, from what I understand about their support is that, first of all, it's been mostly, uh, it's always been there in the background,
Mhm.
and so it's been something that it is something very reliable that you just know is there, so you don't have to think about it per se. So in specific ways, it meant that starting from the suggestion about the library to going to one larger library ourselves to pick up a more you know uh, a more exhaustive book on astronomy and space so that I could learn it in proper detail, to giving me access to any possible related resources that I could need to learn more about space, and to take up science in my junior college as a formal education option so
Mhm.
that I could pursue science further. So that's basically, it's just always been there, so it has never stumbled. And that's so it's hard to remember specific instances because it it's just always there. So it's like,
Yeah,
you start taking it for granted in some ways, to be very honest. So it's sort of like, air, you just assume it's there.
yeah.
So yeah, so that was that. So, and to this day it's been mostly the same. I mean, their support is there through any career decision that I make. So from my early days in exploring, learning about space, to the education part, to my profession right now, it's just been consistent.
That's very interesting to hear, Jatan. Because often they say that uh, when you have a parent that has taken up or studied science themselves, it does help to encourage the child. And sometimes parents that are in STEM professions often push their children to. So, did you feel like you had that sort of environment growing up, or do you think that's even necessary that a parent must
So
have, or or even if it wasn't your parent, was there another friend or a uncle that?
so Yeah, so in my case, it was actually not that particular instance, because my parents are not from science, technology, engineering, or mathematical backgrounds, and so they were just wanting me to pursue because they were just happy to see me pursue what I liked,
Mhm.
and so they did not have any background of their own, so they did not know exactly what I would do, what I could do next, beyond just basic things that they could figure out for themselves. So but once I figure something out, like, with once I get access to some information from somewhere, they were happy to enable that basically.
Nice.
But I would imagine it's certainly different for someone who has been born and brought up in a in an environment where the parents are themselves from science backgrounds. so that I would definitely assume that it would be different, at
Hmm.
least in terms of the information available. So in my case, it has always been and it continues to be the case where, since I have no one in the larger family from such a background, like
Hmm.
in the entire larger family, I'm pretty much the first one to have gone into science, um, mainstream.
Okay.
I mean, sure, there have been some engineers who then went on to, you know, start their own businesses and stuff, but it's not particularly STEM, so in a strict definition of it.
Sure.
So they're not doing anything in STEM specifically.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, since I did not have access to any of those information and resources readily,
Hmm.
it has always meant that I need to figure out uh, information from somewhere else and
Yeah.
from someone else. And in that context, the getting access to people, once I figure out that, where do I need to go or what do I need to do, the parents have been very helpful. And the other entity that has been really helpful is the internet. So I mean, we take it for granted now, but in when I was in school, about, this is when 2006 2007,
Mhm.
internet access was there, but not it was not as ubiquitous as it is now. It was not as easily accessible, not as fast, but it was just as important, and it was just as useful once you do get do get access to it. So yeah, so that's been pretty much the case.
That's yeah. That I mean, you make me think about how the internet has actually removed a lot of the barriers that people would normally face to access information about a particular field. Because now you can basically access knowledge that you want, that maybe someone that was growing up in the 60s or 70s or even earlier would not be able to access. So even if you don't have
Correct.
like a parent or a family member in the field, you can connect with the best minds in the field. And as your relative, I mean, they were in an engineering field, it's still STEM, but that's what I want to understand, that you chose like when you went to university after high school. I know that you've done your bachelor of science in physics, right? And then you did your master of science in physics, and that's 5 years of focused study. So what motivated that decision to study more foundational science rather than take a more applied discipline like engineering? Because I know there's a tendency for a lot of young people, growing up in our context, both of us grew up in Mumbai, to take up engineering as a field of study if you do end up taking science. So what shifted? I mean, what were some of the reasons you decided to study physics as a subject, and what was that
So
experience like for you?
So for me, it was a very easy decision because, as I said, since I was interested in space exploration and I took science in my junior college, my next goal was to figure out how to become a scientist who studies space exploration, studies space,
Mm.
and who tries to figure out, how the universe works, and what a particular star is doing, and what do planets have inside them and stuff like that. So the idea was very simple, that I want to study space as a profession. Back then, that was the idea. And so what do I need to do for that? So after some searches on the internet and stuff like that, I figured out that you need to do pure sciences
Mhm.
to be able to study, in particular physics, to be able to study astronomy, because astronomy relies on physics as its foundation. So that was the decision that led to pursuing physics in my bachelor's and then subsequently my master's. So yeah, that was a pretty easy call in the larger context. The harder part was to figure out that I what do I need to do specifically, and that what turned out to be bachelor's and master's in physics.
Okay.
So yeah, that, and I had, apart from an interest in engineering, I had an interest in engineering. I still do have an enormous interest in engineering, from a perspective of gaining knowledge about it, as to what do they do, how does it affect other things, what are the limits of engineering, how do we have advances in that, and so on. But I had no interest in, and still have no interest in, pursuing it as a profession. That is, I don't want to become an engineer.
Got it.
I want to use engineering as a means to do science.
Got it.
So, and that's what a lot of my space exploration writing is also about. I do touch upon technology of space exploration,
Yeah.
but in the context of how is it enabling science.
Mm.
And so that's the context. So yeah, so basically that that idea has always stayed, that pure science is the motivator and the driver.
That's pretty interesting, Jatin, because I'm thinking about the decisions you have to make at this point of time, right? You're trying to think about a profession you can take up, and the most the path that's normally laid out for you is that of a scientist. And
Hmm.
knowing you today, I know you did not take that path, but I'm thinking about, were there some experiences at university? Like, one of the things you would tell me about was um, going to these stargazing events, and that was an interesting sort of curiosity for you. You also were part of a group of young people that used to organize these I don't remember the name, but they were called lecture camps or word camps or sci camps, and you would
Right.
actually do like lectures on random science topics, and you would co-host them in a lot of ways. And also we were part of like a little circle called the learning circle. So I'm just thinking about, were there experiences like this that you know pushed your thinking with regards to space exploration, even within the university system and beyond?
Hmm. Right, right. So yeah, so that's been one part of where my shift to science communication from trying to become a scientist came into be. However, the major shift was even before that. Was when in my high school, after my high school actually, just before I started my bachelor's in physics, I was introduced to writing on the internet as a blog, on a blog by my cousin. And so he showed me Blogger, which was popular at the time, and that was my first introduction to blogging. And I was completely blown away, because I was like, okay, you can just start a blog here for free, and you can type stuff out and it will get published on the internet and everyone can find it. Google can surface the result if it finds it relevant, and so on. So that was a very powerful idea, the fact that you can just publish something from your couch and have it instantly readable by the entire world, as long as they can access it or find it.
Hmm.
That was just a beautiful idea, and I was hooked to it. So I started blogging uh, long back, so that's about 10 years now almost. So I started blogging. I was doing that on and off, even when I thought I was, even when I wanted to become a scientist and I was pursuing bachelor's and master's in physics. I was blogging on the side, and as and when I got time, as and when I could, churn out articles just out of interest, not to, run a blog with X amount of followers or to have any goal to that, just because I like to write
Hmm.
and I like to explain what I learned in those classes in bachelor's and masters. So
Ah.
if I learned about uh, uh, quantum mechanics, or if I learned about astrophysics, then I would like to write about it. And that's also where these ideas which you mentioned about, trying to host lectures in the city and give lectures myself, and go to sky observation sessions where I would explain people about the stars in the universe and give talks and also learn more things myself, and so on. All of these were part of the outreach which I inherently like to do, but did
Hmm.
not realize it until later in my after my masters, long after my masters actually. So even after my masters got over, I was still thinking about becoming a scientist primarily
Hmm.
and as my profession.
And what
And
was your master's research about, Jatin?
so yeah, so my masters was in physics, but and after I completed my masters, I did a research project in astrophysics for 1 year to
Okay.
get a sense of what research looks like
Okay.
in practice.
Okay, I'm
And
just curious because I
so
think there are a lot of young people that would be interested, in terms of how maybe at the graduate level you have to be a lot more specific. So if you could just help us understand some of that, that would be great. Just very briefly, if
right,
that's
so
possible.
yeah, sure. So, my research project was in astrophysics, which I did just after completing my masters. Specifically, it was about the idea in astrophysics is basically to take any natural phenomenon, let's say a particular type of star,
Hmm.
and whatever it does, let's say it emits X-rays, and so the idea is you study those X-rays and you try to figure out what exactly is the mechanism that generates those X-rays.
Mm.
Similarly, uh, 10,000 objects will have 10,000 characteristics.
Sure.
So every astrophysicist will try to pick up a certain aspect of it or some overarching theme about it. and then try to understand those details
Got it.
via research and data and so on. So in my case, it was basically about uh, so there's this space telescope called Astrosat. It is India's first space telescope. It
Okay.
was launched in 2015 and it is still orbiting Earth as we speak.
Sure.
So my project was about studying X-ray data from that telescope about a particular star, which I would analyze to figure out what is exactly going on in that star that it is emitting such intense X-rays.
Mm.
So basically, so that was my research project, so which I did in 2017, so not
Okay.
long ago, and while I was doing that, I was also blogging on the side.
Okay.
Um, so
So
I was
that I mean
blogging on Medium at the time.
that's a good segue into the blogging question, Jatan. I feel like that is such an important part of your life and your journey. And what's interesting is you kept blogging through school, through university. And how did this shift happen? Because uh, when you start off on Blogger, do people just come and read your work, or did you feel like there was another medium that gave you more readers? And how did you reach out to other people in the space exploration community to come and read your work? So I want you to sort of share like some insights into that process, and also, yeah, maybe just talk about your writing for now. That would be really helpful, I think.
Right, so that's a very interesting question. I didn't think about it that way, to be honest. So that's
Yeah,
very interesting. So the idea was, okay, so when I started blogging right after high school, for about 5 years or so, or more, in fact, so about for 5 years or so, I was just blogging out of my passion and because I wanted to write
yeah.
about I wanted to write about what I had learned. And so there was there, I did not have any major audience. In fact, I remember specifically that at the time the best views that I had gotten per day in those entire 5 years was about 100, I think, and I was very happy about that. Like I was rejoicing about that on one day. So most of my audience for 5 years was just friends and people I could find, physically most of the time, whom I knew personally in some way or the other and were interested in science, or were my friends and not interested in science.
But how
So
many
I would
articles you
just
wrote in that period, Jatan?
so
About a
um,
hundred?
I yeah, it should be about that, but I don't
Okay.
remember explicitly because it was more like I would just write whenever I felt like.
But
Um,
but would you think
and
that
they just
time, just to I'm just thinking, was that time sort of your writing school where you were refining your ability
no,
to
no. So
communicate?
no, no. So I think I got your question. I'll
Yeah,
come to that in a bit.
sure.
So for these 5 years, I was just writing for fun, and I did not have a large audience. And Blogger gave me some, since I was publishing on the internet, and I was sharing on Facebook and Facebook groups and so on. So occasionally I would get like 30, 40 extra people and so on. But then in 2017, right when I was doing my master's project,
Hmm.
in about the astrophysics project which we spoke about, I started writing on Medium because Medium was getting popular at the time.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's medium.com, and it was getting popular at the time. So I just shifted. I just started writing there. It seemed more modern than Blogger. It had better features and so on. So I that is the time when I started writing more regularly and with an audience in mind, because by that time I was on Twitter, I was on Facebook, and so on. So I was like, okay, let's if I'm writing anyway, let me share it with the world.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing that happened is social media did not give me a significant audience in terms of volume. Medium did. So
Ah,
since Medium was getting popular at the time, every time I hit publish, I would just get 1,000 views or so the next day, and
really?
that was incredible. And I started getting followers also, and I think in about 7 to 8 months, I crossed 5,000 followers on the platform, and I had not anticipated that, nor had I planned for it in any way. It just happened because the platform was growing. To be very fair,
Very
so it
interesting.
was partly my writing that I was writing, regularly,
Mm.
and the fact that people happened to find it interesting,
Mm.
and it was partly the platform who was seeing a surge in readers at the time. So those things combined gave me more exposure, and that is when my first break into professional writing happened. is when uh, so Medium was getting popular, and that Team Indus, a space company, a private space company based out of Bangalore, uh, they also had their blog on Medium. So they
Mm.
were writing about what their space mission was about on Medium, and and their marketing team came across my blog since I was also writing on Medium, and they thought that this person is also in India, so let's give him a call. So they
Mhm.
called me and asked me if I would like to join their marketing team to write about their space mission for them,
Oh,
and so that was my first professional break in writing.
wow.
So I obviously said yes, and I went there to write about the space mission and space exploration in general for them.
That's, I just want to pause here, Jatin, because you make it seem like it's really easy, but what's really fascinating about this is that you basically got your own job by writing on the internet, right? And that is
Yeah.
something a lot of young people don't think about, that you can actually reach out to an audience and
Mm,
create some value on the internet, and that can actually open up so many more opportunities for you, because I'm sure there must have been somebody on that team that read your blog and they thought that maybe the same writing would be useful in our context too, right?
right.
So, like, what do you think was different about the way you wrote, Jatan? Because everyone writes on Medium, right? Why do you think your
Mm.
writing got so much attention? And is there something, what is your, like, you don't have to share like the finer details, but what's your like magic recipe of a good space science
Uh,
exploration article?
so do you mean now, or do you mean at the time when
I,
this
I
happened?
I'd like the listeners to know about your journey, Jatin. So preferably at that time, and then we can come on to
Okay.
what it is now.
So I think at that time, based on what I know about writers on Medium at that time, because I was also reading about space from other writers on Medium, and with the exception of one writer who is like super popular and so on, with the exception of that writer, I think uh, about my writing, if I were to say it myself, then I think it was two things. One was breaking down complex concepts into simpler parts. That's
Mm,
where my physics education basically came into effect. So it was not like just because I became a science writer now means that my education was useless, because it is precisely that physics graduate bachelor's and master's degree that has helped me understand complex concepts, so that when I come to my writing of any topic, I can explain that complex concept in a way that is palpable to other people,
mm,
because if I need to understand it myself. So the understanding of complex concepts, one, which then I tried, made effort to put it into simpler terms.
sure.
So I put effort into that. So that was one part, and the second part was trying to find really, really good images at the time, which I thought no one else was doing. So so that people can click on that and get appealed by those images and so on. So and since I could explain those images also, right? It was not like I'll just slap an image on your face. It
Yeah.
was like I'll slap this image and then I will explain you what this image is. So, yeah. So I think it was a combination of those two things, in my opinion, that made me separate. That gave me more popularity on Medium compared to other writers, with the
But
exception of that one popular writer who is Ethan Siegel,
oh,
and
okay.
I have learned a lot from him. So
That's really interesting, Jatin. I think the point you make is so important, right? That education is so important in a formal setting because it gives you the foundation from which you can go on to any, because that those 5 years at university actually gave you such a strong grounding in the fundamental elements of the subject that you were able to apply it in different contexts in a way that was suitable to you, right? So, and that's something that I also want to push forward as an idea, is that just because you want to uh, do something innovative, you don't have to drop out of school or start a company. You can actually get your education, go to university, and then once you have that knowledge, actually find ways to apply it in the world in a very unique way. So thanks for sharing that insight with us, Jatin. And also, I think you're very humble
sure.
about this, and I've been reading your blog for over 10, I think 6, I've known you for about 10 years now, right, Jatin? And I think at least
No,
eight,
I think
eight,
no. I think it's about 7 years. Yes, 7.
7. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
2013 or so.
yeah, somewhere around that time. Yes.
Yeah. I think what I always enjoyed about the way you spoke, Jatin, is that, and I've seen you evolve over time, right? But I feel like you have this skill of making something very complex seem very easy. Like, for instance, when you spoke about your master's research, you made everything seem so simple that, these stars emit X-rays. I mean, it's obviously a lot more complex in the technical terms. And then as astrophysicists, you study the properties of those X-rays. So it is not as simple as that. And and I think that is a real skill. And that's something that a lot of students really want when they're in school, because if you think about the stars and you think about the universe, it's all us, right? I mean, it's just so beautiful to look up at the sky and be like, planet Earth is not just the only planet in this solar system. There are so many other planets, and these planets,
Right.
move around stars, and it's just so fascinating. And I feel like, thank you for making things so simple through your work. And obviously this interview does not do justice to your work, and I recommend that all the listeners actually go and read all of Jatin's wonderful articles. He's obviously progressed a lot since that time. uh, but just coming back, retracing,
Thank
I
you.
was just, I just wanted to bring this point up, that you have worked really hard on your writing for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's not just come up overnight. So thank you for your work. Like, about your writing,
Thank
Jatin,
you.
like,
Thank you.
yeah, like from Medium, right? Because I mean, you are out of university and you're looking for a job, right? You did start working at Team Indus, and yeah, was Team. Can you give us some background about Team Indus, if that's okay? Like the work they were doing and the work you were doing there, and for how long you were with that organization.
Yeah, sure. So basically, Team Indus is this private space company based out of Bangalore. And
Mhm.
when I joined them, the idea was they were building a moon mission, which is very similar to what Chandrayaan 2 was for ISRO. So it was a similar moon mission in that you had to build a spacecraft and which you would intend to land on the moon. And there would be a rover. Once the lander has successfully touched down, the rover would come out and try to explore the moon surface for science and stuff.
Mm,
And so that was basically the engineering challenge that Team Indus had started, uh, building on, building for. And so I was part of that effort initially via writing blogs for them about the mission as to what, how, for that would be technical blogs as to how, for example, you could take how do you build the structure of such a lander,
mm,
and you know uh, for example, if it has to touch down on the moon, then it would experience significant forces. So, how do you need to build the structure? What material do you use? And what is the physics that goes into it, and so on. And so that's one aspect. Then there's the other aspect as to how do you build the propulsion system for such a lander? What kind of engines do you choose, and so on. And then there's the science aspect. Or what science do you do on the moon, and so on. So I would write blogs about all these various technical and scientific aspects of the mission. That
okay.
was one. The other thing I did was completely different to this was I was actually part of the technical team later on, where since I was from a science background and other people were engineers there,
Hmm.
so the idea was since the moon is not unlike the earth in the sense that not all of the places on the moon are the same. Just like on earth you have Himalayas and Sahara, which are two very different kind of landforms, so geologically speaking. So just like that, on the moon you have different kinds of geological places, so going to one place is totally not like going to the other place.
Wow.
So the idea was, if you are landing on the moon, where you go and land is very important, because that would decide what science you would do.
Got
So
it.
as a person with a science background, my job was to figure out uh, where on the moon did the science community want to go to maximize science. And based on the engineering constraints that you have, you can land only on these kinds of rocky areas, but not too rocky areas, and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
You cannot land on a place which is too inclined, otherwise the lander would just fall, and things like that. So there were all sorts of major and minor engineering constraints.
Got it.
So take into account those constraints and take into account what the science community wanted to do,
Yeah.
and try to interface those two.
Interesting.
and find some sort of a ground. So
So Jatin, that's actually very interesting. I feel like this is was this when Moon Monday actually started, Jatin? Because you mentioned having these different places on the moon that would have been of interest to the scientific community. But I feel like, was this when you realized that the moon is so diverse in terms of what it has to offer, and we need to, I mean, personally, you would like to explore what each part has to offer. So how did Moon Monday emerge
absolutely.
from there?
Absolutely, yeah. So the original version of Moon Monday absolutely totally came out of here. You're correct on that. So since I was, researching places on the moon anyway as part of my job, I was like, okay, let's blog about it as well. At least the scientific parts of it. So that's where the idea came into be. And the other thing that was driving that was I was just fascinated by those geological landforms, because for me it changed what the moon was.
Hmm.
For all this time, even though I've been saying that I've been interested in space exploration since I was a child and so a student and so on, and I studied physics for the most part of my life of studying and learning space exploration, it was mostly about things beyond the moon, not as much about the moon itself.
Got it.
So when it came to the moon and when I started understanding more about the moon in particular, I was just completely, baffled and completely drawn to it, because I did not think about the complexity that it is capable of, and the big science questions that it can answer, which I learned as part of that job and as part of learning about the moon, generally speaking,
Mm.
later on. So yeah, so Moon Monday, the original version of it, absolutely came out of that. Yeah.
And was this also when you got to see that rocket launch? Uh,
Um, yeah. So this no, that was a bit later.
that was
That
okay.
was in 2019 late,
Okay.
but yeah, somewhat connected to that. Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, that's interesting, right? How one particular object that you study in the solar system can give you so much information. It's almost like a synecdoche, right? Where when you
It's
find out
insane.
like one little property, you get like an understanding of almost everything. And that is what's so beautiful about
Insane.
science, right? That you find
Right.
something that's very elemental, it can actually
Right.
translate very easily. And this is not
Right.
something you see very easily in the social sciences, because there is a lot of complexity with regards to how you can take the results of a study and translate it into a larger setting, because humans are different
Correct.
in every setting, right? But in science,
Right.
if you get as foundational as you can actually prove something and then replicate it in so many other settings, right? So that is what's really beautiful about, and that's something that,
Absolutely. And
go
yeah,
ahead,
I
Jeff.
think you're spot on that. I mean, it just even in my recent learnings and writings about specific planets in the solar system and specific objects in the solar system, I've just been, constantly amazed by how sending just one mission to a particular object has completely transformed our understanding of not just that object, but also the solar system at large,
Sure.
and will do so again if an object which has not been studied so far is sent a mission to. So it's just baffling. So there's so many unanswered questions. We haven't figured out anything about the solar system yet, so to speak. It's in the very early nascent stages of it.
That's
So yeah,
interesting. So I think a lot of our listeners are going to be those, space scientists and aeronautical engineers and space communicators, just like you in the
awesome.
future. Jatin, I'm just going to ask you one or two more questions, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just want to know, like, you started writing on Blogger, then you moved to Medium, and at the same time you were writing for a professional organization. How did you because I know you're doing this full time now, right? You are actually writing full time. So, how did you move from Medium to writing full time, and where did
Hmm.
that money come from? Because I know, I mean, I really enjoy your writing, and this is something I want to push forward. Is that when you find a writer whose writing you really admire, find a way to support them financially. And I'm glad you gave me that opportunity. and I support your writing every month with a reasonable amount, but it's a small way to actually, support writers that are doing good work, right? So can you just give us some insight into how from Medium you moved on to writing independently and maintaining your finances doing this?
Right. Yeah, certainly. So it was a slow, gradual process.
Okay.
So what I did was, while I was working at Team Indus,
Mm,
I was continuing my own blog on the side, although the frequency had decreased. So I was still writing on Medium on my own blog as well. But then what happened is, in 2018, I got to know about this conference in India, in a city in India, where it was a conference on science journalism and scientists,
mm,
and the I went to that conference where and there many of the big shot science writers and many scientists who are interested in science communication were all gathered at one place, and it was like, a festival of science writing and science journalism in my head. And so I just went there out of interest, trying to know about what they wanted to tell the world there, whoever was attending there. And so that is where I met Mukund. He is the editor of the Wire Science, a popular publication in India.
mm,
Um, so it's an internet media publication, and it's very popular here. So I met the editor, and I was just talking to him. We chatted for like about 5 minutes or so, and he asked me about my background, about my work. I asked about his, and he got interested in what I had to offer. So I basically said that I would like to. I've been blogging on an amateur basis and on a professional basis very recently, and I would love to write for a publication.
mm,
So he gave me the option to write for them, and we decided on a topic, and I published my first article for a professional media publication then, and
nice.
it was a paid piece. So it was a fully professionally done article. And then I started doing articles regularly for them. So I wrote about one article for them every month,
Wow.
and that was still freelancing. I mean, that was on the side while I had my job at Team Indus.
Okay.
And then I got published on the Planetary Society, where one of my articles was noticed by Emily Lakrawala, who used to work on at the Planetary Society at the time, and
Mm,
she's a very very popular science communicator. And so she noticed my article because I had tagged her on Twitter.
mm,
So one of my articles which I wrote was inspired by her article, so which is why I tagged her, saying
mm,
that, inspired by Emily Lakrawala's article, I have written this particular article on how missions in space exploration have failed due to failure in electronics that they carry. So she read that article and she found it very interesting, and she liked it enough that she contacted me that she would like to republish it on the Planetary Society. So that's how the Planetary Society happened for the first time. And then I reached out to them a year later with another story
mm,
for science that we learned from Apollo missions in particular. So in particular, the origin of the moon.
mm,
So yeah, so they were happy to consider that story, and I wrote for them again. And then I slowly realized that, I can actually do this for a living. I started pitching articles to publications, and then I slowly started writing more or less regularly for some of them. So that's when I realized that I want to do science writing professionally, uh,
full time.
and I really enjoy doing that.
Mm,
So I thought, okay, let me quit my job and let me do this full time. So this was around late 2019,
mm,
when I had been publishing for The Wire, and I had one or two articles here and there on different publications, including the Planetary Society. So I was like, okay, let's just quit and let me do this full time. If I have all the time that I don't have now, then I would be able to write more articles and approach more publications. So that's
right.
how it started. And fast forward to now, I'm pretty much writing, full time, uh, doing science writing full time for publications,
That's
and
really
doing more things of my own.
That's interesting because you have multiple sources of income, and because you've started writing for a global audience, you have consumers, I mean, people that want to read your work internationally as well, right, Jatin? That's interesting that the internet actually opened up your market in terms of who would want to read your work. And I think
Right.
that is something that is important to note here is that you can use the internet as a tool. What I also got from that conversation, Jatin, is that you were able to tap into knowledge networks, whether it's the science conference, the science journalism conference. Like you met Mukund there, and that opened up this opportunity. Similarly, you used another network, which is Twitter, and you send that tweet out to this person, but you backed it up with some valuable data. And that's the thing,
Right.
when we reach out to a professional, we think that they just have to help us without us providing something valuable in return. But you were able to write something building on her earlier piece, which opened up that connection. So that is
Right.
actually really insightful. And I know like this is something I'd like to push forward, and I wouldn't want you to, like if you are interested in supporting Jatin as a freelance writer, you can go to his blog, which I will link below, and you can support him on a website called Patreon, where you can contribute a small amount, and that will help him continue writing independently. And that's something I highly recommend you do, not just for Jatin but for other freelance writers, because they spend a lot of time working on these pieces, and it's important we remunerate them for that time. Jatin, thank you for your time. Just to close
Thank you.
this interview, can you give me one resource that that'll get kids excited, students excited about science? I know you've given me one book, you've given me many books and many videos, but one book that you feel students should start off with to open up their horizons about the
I I
universe.
would say rather than a book, I would say that since a lot of my learning has come from the internet and enabling of my profession and everything else, as you said rightly so, like the internet has been quintessential to everything I do and I've done so far.
Sure.
So I would say I would direct them to planetary.org,
Okay.
which is the Planetary Society's website,
Okay.
and they do a lot of interesting articles. They do a lot of things, but among
Sure.
that is their work in science outreach and exploration, particularly with space exploration.
Sure.
So the what they do is they have a lot of articles where anyone with no assumed knowledge whatsoever can just come to their website and learn about how and why we explore space,
Got it.
and what are the big questions to answer and what have we learned so far and so
Sure.
on. So I would just direct them to planetary.org and then explore as they wish and as their curiosity leads them. And the other thing is, I mean, it's a very uh, dull suggestion, but it's a very valid one at the same time. Once you are hooked to space exploration, there is nothing like Wikipedia to get you to the next level, because it's boring, it's drab, it has lots of passive voice sentences, it's clunky, but once you are interested, all of it doesn't matter. And it will give you links to pretty much everything, to articles, to original sources, to research papers and stuff. So I think that would be the level 2. So if you're already interested in space exploration, just start reading random Wikipedia pages. If you're wanting to know more, go to planetary.org, and of course my blog.
Thank you, Jatin. This was so eye-opening and such a wonderful journey. I mean, it's just speaking to you makes me want to go back to school and start off learning science again. And actually, what you made me realize is that there's no age to learn science.
Right.
We can be scientists at whatever age. And I think I'm gonna go
Correct.
and start looking at some of these resources. I've probably looked at some of them already, but maybe go back and try and become a little scientist myself. So thank you,
Awesome.
Jatin. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your time.
Awesome.
And this is the end
Yeah.
of our
Thank
first
you.
episode of Learning Stories. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you. Yeah.